Arcane artisans. Not all of those who are gifted with aptitude for the arcane become mages who seek their fortune as adventurers, nor do they join the ranks of the armies or noble retinues of their nation. Neither do they become magisters that walk erudite halls to instruct on and delve into the great mysteries of the art. Indeed, a great many mages do not even spare a thought to the vocations that may place them in mortal danger, or those of study for its own sake. They do not seek an adventurer's fame or the grand campaigns of mighty armies, nor the company of their fellows in seclusion from the unlearned and ignorant masses of the world. Instead, they turn their considerable skills towards the production of goods and services for towns and cities, selling their wares to noble patrons and common laborers alike. No simple apothecary or dabbler in enchantment and artifice can match the expertise and quality of those who endeavor to become masters of their respective crafts. From life-saving potions and magical equipment to enchanted tools that improve the quality of daily life and labor, these artisans form one of the cornerstones of civilized societies around the world. Their endless quest for its improvement makes them integral to development beyond simple agrarian life, and their work often comes hand in hand with the rise of advanced and powerful nations. Though their focus may lie in serving on the industrial side of civilian settings, they are still potent arcane casters that often wield the same spells as one would find used by an adventurer or military mage, as their research leads them to seek out answers in every field of magic available to them. Many an ignorant, belligerent or nosy official have found themselves burned, electrocuted, frozen or melted, even transmuted into useful materials by an incensed shopkeeper to exact payment for the disruption of their business. Ludmilla and Lady Schulte rested on a bench placed in the shade of a tree that had been left to grow off the street near the perfumer's shop. The vampire was idly staring at the clear afternoon sky while Ludmilla was once again busy recalculating her once again obsolete budget. "You seem to be taking this all in stride," Lady Schulte spoke as she watched the wisps of the remaining clouds drift away as they journeyed southwards. "My head is still spinning from all this, actually," Ludmilla said. 96 platinum is a lot of money, is it not, my lady? "I wouldn't know," Lady Schulte said. "I'm no more aware of the value of anything than I was an hour ago." "I'm sorry, my lady," Ludmilla apologized. "My mind is swamped just trying to keep up with everything. 96 platinum is enough to feed, clothe and arm every villager in Warden's Vale for an entire year. Or at least it would be, if they were still around." "Well, if you put it that way, it seems like it would be a significant sum for one of you, but you made it sound as if your territory is small. Is this not the case?" "It is," Ludmilla nodded. "There were only 30 households last summer." "And how does that compare to the other nobles?" Lady Schulte asked. "Corlin Barony has around 2,000 households, last I heard." Ludmilla dredged up the numbers from her memory. "Countess Jesn't should have close to 5,000 households in her personal domain alone. Then there are 5 other baronies within her territory, but they aren't as productive as the Riverlands, so perhaps double that in the whole of Jesn County." She frowned and made a vexed noise. "I guess once I actually look at the numbers from that perspective, it's not so much. 96 platinum would barely last 2 days if Countess Jesn suddenly had all of her production cease like it is right now. I suppose this is what most people see when they look at the nobility and their revenues. They think about what they would personally purchase for themselves if they had access to such wealth, with no obligations. 96 platinum coins for an average city laborer is over 25 years of work." "Your domain is vacant now," Lady Schulte said. "It seems like you do indeed have that much for yourself." "It belongs to House Zaradnik," Ludmilla stated. "The revenues of the domain should go towards its development and growth for greater gains in the future. After hiring and providing for the manor household, purchasing the tools and other supplies for the labor force, and buying what is needed to maintain the village, I will still have the majority of this capital to work with. I need to see about attracting new tenants and investing in services and industries for the village to support the surrounding lands as they are developed." "You seem to have a clear picture concerning the future of your territory." "The frontier territories are far behind in development compared to the interior regions," Ludmilla said. "There is much to study and learn from what the other nobles have done. But what works for them may not necessarily work for me. I have a few ideas but, by and large, it will just be a lot of trial and error, which I suspect is where most of my capital will vanish." "For someone with such a progressive outlook," Lady Schulte said, "that sounded quite pessimistic." I did not mean for it to sound that way, my lady, but after looking at the filled-out parts of the almanacs that the administration provided, if they are accurate, then the nobility cannot rely on their past to model the future. Seeing Lady Shaltier's face turn blank in confusion, Ludmilla realized how cryptic her last sentence sounded. "It's the undead workforce, my lady," she explained. "If the sorceress kingdom can field this labor in quantities enough to fill the needs of every territory, then our economies are fundamentally changed. For a fraction of the cost of providing for tenant farmers, these undead servitors can do the same work. The same goes for any other sort of menial labor that they can manage. That means we will need far fewer tenants working directly as laborers, and more tenants that are capable of directing the undead in tasks that benefit from specialized direction. The nature of value will shift drastically. Any goods produced with the assistance of undead labor will become cheaper relative to those produced by more complex tasks that still require the expertise of skilled craftsmen. Territories that have vast amounts of arable land will be able to thrive through sheer volume of agriculture, but those that do not will need to find or create something unique to their own territories that set them apart from the rest. Warden's Vale falls into the latter category. For the time being I can rely on forestry and the limited agricultural space we have, but the terrain of the highlands makes development like you see in the interior difficult and expensive by comparison." Ludmilla looked around at the empty street, continuing to share her thoughts with Lady Shaltier. "The entire region will feel these changes, I think. Rantel is the hub of inland trade between Riestais, the Empire and the Theocracy. I've seen those that look like they come from places even further out as well. Once the duchy comes back to life and commerce resumes, the city will be swarmed with traders who will seize the opportunity to buy the goods that the sorceress kingdom produces at significantly lower costs. I think you've gotten so used to us that you forget that most people are rather averse to the undead," Lady Shaltier said. "You are correct, my lady," Ludmilla conceded, "but, like this city, it should only be a matter of time. The most intrepid merchants will carry the sorceress kingdom's products far and wide, and their guildmates will see their caravans laden with commodities obtained at prices impossible elsewhere. Ambition will overcome fear. The only fear will be the fear of falling behind their rivals and competitors, and that will drive them all the more." "So, how long would you say until this happens?" Lady Shaltier leaned towards her. "This vision you conjure seems to fulfill a part of His Majesty's wishes. If trade is allowed to flow freely, a few years, perhaps," Ludmilla said. "Not more than a decade for the immediate region. The only obstacles that come to mind would be the political and cultural barriers that may form in opposition to the growing power of the nation, or the nature of the sorceress kingdom itself. Since the undead will be doing most of the menial labor, someone might spread rumors of cursed foodstuffs, for instance." "Those skeletons are incapable of casting curses," Lady Shaltier muttered. "We should find the individuals that spread these baseless rumors and silence them." "That is a needless effort which may cause more problems than it solves, my lady. It can be safely ignored, I think. Merchants will find ways around those barriers to facilitate trade, and even a formal trade embargo seems self-defeating. Over time, those that embrace our nation's trade will thrive compared to those that do not due to the cost of our goods. If nations do not yield to this trade, they will slowly lose ground to their rivals until their lands are forcefully taken from them. So, sooner or later, they will fall under the sorceress kingdom's economic hegemony. If they wage war to break the hegemony, they will only provide the justification to be crushed by His Majesty's armies." "Did you realize this all on your own, while sitting on this bench?" Lady Shaltier examined the rough wooden construction of their seat suspiciously. "It is the knowledge and experiences of the past day coming together, and perhaps I have been raised in part to see things from this perspective for my entire childhood." Ludmilla's gaze turned inwards. "Realizing possibilities makes you come into other possibilities. As resources become available and knowledge grows, things that I would not have not conceived of come into view. As each hour passes, my life seems to become busier, I want to see and do more, and the hours of the day seem ever more insufficient. Besides, that should be the reason why the annexation of this duchy came in the form that it did, yes?" Maybe?" Lady Shaltier's gaze shifted away. "Some of the others should understand at least this much, but even the most intelligent amongst us can only hope to skim the surface of His Majesty's limitless insight. The laws of Riestais have been kept intact," Ludmilla stated, which means that His Majesty has left the management of its territories to those that already have a firm grasp on the characteristics of their respective fiefs. The policies and mechanisms of the administration have been set up so that we can smoothly adopt the concepts that the royal court wishes to introduce to the nation so they can, in turn, realize their goals for industry and trade. As all of the pieces fall into place, this grand strategy will become an unstoppable current. One can either have it carry them comfortably to where it brings us, or be swept away forcefully to the same destination regardless. Lady Shiltir was silently mouthing something as she digested Ludmilla's words. Her expression suddenly sharpened, though, and she turned her head to the south. "Oh, they found something," she said. "My lady." Ludmilla twisted around to look to the storefront to see if Amelia had come out. "Not them. The members of my household that I sent to locate your ship." "Really, my lady?" Ludmilla rose from her seat. "Where did they find it?" "I don't think I've seen a name for it on the maps. There's a steep section of the valley, where the river goes through a series of large bends. The ship they see has run aground on the bank." "I know where that is. The shores are rocky though." Ludmilla frowned worriedly. "Is there any damage, my lady?" "They can't tell," Lady Shiltir replied. "Shall we go take a look?" Ludmilla thought for a moment before deciding to wait. "We should wait and return to the house with a wagon, my lady." "What about the food you still have to sell?" Lady Shiltir asked. "The Merchant Guild as well, to collect your payments." "Seeing today's revenues thus far, I can provision the city manor with it instead," Ludmilla answered. "It should be enough to keep the household staff fed for a while without needing to access the city's limited supplies. We can drop by the guild after we've seen to the vessel." As they made their way back to the wagon, the front door of the workshop opened. The heat and odors of its interior once again wafted out into the street, and Amelia emerged with a small, lacquered rosewood chest held in both hands. One of the vampire brides was holding a smaller box with a similar appearance. Germaine followed after them, closing the door lightly behind her with a grin on her face. "It looks like they found something for you as well, my lady," Ludmilla noted, but Lady Shiltir only tapped her lip thoughtfully. The perfumer came up to Ludmilla and held up 2 sheets of high-quality paper. "This one's the bill for what your lady's maid purchased," Germaine said as she handed over the first, then the second, "and this one's the invoice for the Merchant Guild. You can move your wagon into the alley where we'll grab the rest of your things and get those trees into the warehouse." Ludmilla motioned to the Solita to do as Germaine instructed, then looked down to the bill. Amelia had ordered quite a long list of items. There were 2 sets of women's perfume for each member of the household staff, one set for use during functions held during the day, and another for those held during the evening. There were also a dozen vials of cologne for the manservants that would be hired. She wondered if the undead footmen were expected to use it as well. She scanned over 2 crates of aromatic candles and 1 crate of scented soap as her eyes ran down the list to the end, where the items for her personal use were 3 sets of perfume, soaps, candles, bath salts and scents for her solar. She didn't even know where to start on their use. Her experience with fragrances was next to non-existent, given the remote location of Warden's Vale and the impracticality of using cosmetics that could easily make demi-humans aware of one's presence. Her eyes felt like they would roll out of their sockets when she read the tally at the bottom. 80 gold coins. 8 platinum coins had disappeared before they had even entered her hands. She looked up with a question on her tongue, but Amelia's beaming face seemed so confident and pleased at her selection that Ludmilla's words were left unspoken. "Is there one for me?" Lady Shiltir said as she peeked around Ludmilla's arm at the bill. Well, that one's a gift," the perfumer replied. "You said you were a cleric, but if one of the city temples here had someone like you, they'd be overflowing with supplicants every day. That means you must be a big shot on the king's side, right? The Baroness here defers to you, after all. Just let people know what you're wearing if they ask, and where it comes from. It'll be great for marketing." "Lady Shiltir is the Minister of Transportation," Ludmilla informed her. "Ah ha ha." Germaine abruptly turned around and quickly walked off after the wagon that had disappeared around the corner and into the alley. Ludmilla instructed the Death Knights to help with the cargo, then turned back to Lady Shiltir. She was holding up a clear crystal vial about the length of her pinky finger against the sky, peering at the liquid inside. She suddenly flicked the vial into the air, and it tumbled end over end before falling again to hit the stone pavement at her feet. Rather than shattering, it bounced several times before spinning to a halt. She knelt to pick up the vial again. The vial has a petty enchantment reinforcing it, she noted with interest, and since it has become a magic item, it won't break without one purposely destroying it. How quaint. What did they find for you, my lady? Ludmilla was curious about what the vampire brides found that they thought suited their mistress. Lady Shaltir removed the stopper of the vial and turned it over against her wrist. After testing the scent with a focused expression, she extended her arm. Ludmilla leaned forward. It was rich and earthy, with a hint of green and dried flowers. The ghost of incense could be detected, so faint that it gave the impression it was not actually there. A winter meadow? No, it wouldn't have incense mixed in then. Ludmilla could not quite place the fragrance. A mausoleum, Lady Shaltir offered, or a tomb. The aroma of turned earth, dried flowers and incense in a long-forgotten offering to the past. Her words came together with the fragrance of the perfume to create vivid imagery. Of cold stone and pristine silence, the peace of the grave seducing the weary to rest. It suits you very well, my lady, Ludmilla agreed with the selection. Her quirks aside, Germaine is an excellent perfumer. Do you think she would accept an offer to move her workshop to Warden's Vale? It is much cooler there throughout the year, and she expressed an interest in what could be gathered in the region. If you believe so, I can hardly advise you in matters of your own domain, Lady Shaltir said, then smirked, though you may want to be able to survive an acid cone or two first. The rattling of the now mostly empty freight wagon drew their attention as the Soul Eater drove it back onto the street. Amelia and the vampire brides were already sitting in their usual seat on the rear edge of the wagon. The Death Knights stomped out after them, but Germaine was nowhere to be seen. Where's the perfumer? Ludmilla asked them as she and Lady Shaltir pulled themselves into the front seat. Miss Linez stayed behind in her workshop, my lady, Amelia answered. She looked ready to get to work. It seems like I will have to make my offer some time later, Ludmilla said, not that I am in any way ready to accommodate an alchemist. We are heading back to the manor to drop everything else off. There is something I need to check on before we go out to purchase the rest of what is needed. The sun was hanging over the battlements when the Soul Eater parked the wagon in the service lane behind the manor. After sending Amelia into the house with their things, Ludmilla instructed the Death Knights to carry the crates and barrels of food into the cellar. Is the ship still there, my lady? Ludmilla asked. This child came back right after they located it. Lady Shaltir pointed to the air above their heads, while Ludmilla noticed a small black bat fluttering about. The rest stayed to guard the location, Lady Shaltir told her, so it should still be there unless it somehow dislodges itself and continues downstream. The footmen returned from their task and Ludmilla directed the Soul Eater to meet her in the port village of Calling Barony. She fell in step with Lady Shaltir as they walked along, entering a service lane behind her manor. Are 2 Death Knights enough to move something that heavy? Ludmilla asked. They left the service lane, and it turned out that the gardens between the clubhouse and the royal villa were not far at all if one cut through the back ways. Going by what was conveyed to me, Lady Shaltir answered, they should be able to work it off whatever it's caught on. Are we ready to depart? Yes, my lady, Ludmilla replied. Thank you. Gate. The familiar black portal opened in the air before them in the center of the gazebo. At Lady Shaltir's prompting, Ludmilla stepped through. She blinked as her vision shifted from the surface of the gate to the filtered sunlight of the ravine that was their destination. It was close to where she had expected their location to be by the description that was given earlier. The river flowed down from the south, coming out of the steep gorge that started at the southern end of Warden's Vale. Its flow was broad and deep, curving around the northern edge of the barrier ranges to meander its way eastwards towards the Katsa Plains. She could see signs where people had waded to the shore, leaving prints on the riverbank and a trail of disturbed plants up and into the forest above. The Death Knights appeared through the gate behind Ludmilla and Lady Shaltir and her attendants appeared shortly after. Oh, it's an hour, Lady Shaltir said when she laid her eyes upon the vessel. Is that what this type of boat is called, my lady? Ludmilla asked, turning her attention back to the river. We always just called it the boat or the ship. Even though you've used it for generations? It is the only such vessel in use around here, Ludmilla shrugged. I suppose there was no need to refer to it as anything else. How did you know what it was called? One of the territories at home has several vessels of similar appearance, Lady Shiltier said. Still, it's strange that you don't even know what you've been using. How did it come into your house's employ? My ancestors found it mostly intact on this river somewhere. The villagers managed to refurbish it for transporting goods back and forth from Erantle. We never learned how to build more of them, but if what is claimed about the undead labor in the administration's materials is true, we will need more vessels like this to keep up with my fief's production. Lady Shiltier's gaze crossed over the boat, then looked out over the river. This type of ship is designed for travel on both rivers and large bodies of water, she said. Perhaps, if you travel further down the river, you will find out why it was here. Perhaps you will find more ships to use as well. It may be as you say, my lady, Ludmilla agreed. Besides, one day I would like to see where the river leads. There was a massive chittering in the air above, and she looked up to see Lady Shiltier's household fluttering down to disappear into the shadows surrounding her. The vampire watched from an outcropping that overlooked the riverbend as Ludmilla directed the Death Knights to extract the Gnar from its predicament. After it had been worked off of the hidden stones and placed fully onto the water, Ludmilla stepped over the railing and into the boat as the Death Knights held it fast against the current. She walked up and down its length and hopped a few times in different places, but could not hear or feel anything amiss. Ludmilla looked up to Lady Shiltier. I need to take the ship to the village port south of Erantle, she called up to her. Would you like to join us, my lady? You go on ahead, the vampire made a waving motion. I need to prepare for the daily meeting of the Royal Council. I'll find you after we're done. We may have to meet again tomorrow morning then, Ludmilla apologized. The current in the spring is swift, but I will still only arrive sometime in the middle of the night, or perhaps early in the morning. That long? Can you operate this vessel between the three of you? I don't need the sails going downstream, Ludmilla said. All I need to do is keep the ship away from the shore. The river is quite deep. Come to think of it, the navigators always preferred that I take the night watch. I guess I never realized why until now. Lady Shiltier looked down at them for a moment before floating down. Is something the matter, my lady? Ludmilla asked. Too long, Lady Shiltier said. You still need to buy what you need for your work in the barony, and we need to get your undead laborers on their way. She looked over the Gnar, then out at the river again, at a point not far downstream. Gate. A black portal wide enough for the ship to easily pass through appeared in the river. The roar of churning water issued from behind it. This will take your ship to the section of river before the port, Lady Shiltier told her. I'll meet with you after you return to the city. Thank you, my lady. Ludmilla paused for a moment before asking, what happens if I am unable to get the whole ship into the gate? I don't think anyone has purposely tried that before, Lady Shiltier answered. I'd advise against you experimenting with it. Ludmilla called the Death Knights to board the vessel and slowly steered it out from the shore as the current began to move them. Their course stayed true, until they started getting closer to the gate. The water near the edges of their route was being drawn around the gate due to the tumultuous current caused by the gap in the river behind the portal. She struggled with the tiller, trying to keep the vessel straight, but it started to veer and tumble on its axis. Fortunately, there was still enough space to fit through even while the ship was oriented at a strange angle. On the other side, the abrupt change in current jarred the vessel after they left the gate, throwing all of its occupants off balance. One Death Knight was driven to its knees, while the other was thrown completely overboard with an unexpectedly quiet plop that was drowned out by the roar of the water leaving the portal behind them. Ludmilla was painfully knocked into the tiller, causing the vessel to lurch violently even further, and she leaned limply over it, winded by the impact. Through teary eyes, she recovered her footing and straightened the boat's course once again as the portal silently shut far behind them. Ludmilla worriedly scanned the water's surface, searching for the Death Knight that had fallen overboard, but there was no visible sign of its passing, nor anything at all to indicate where it actually was over the murmur of the river. Hoping it was still somewhere nearby and had not been carried far downstream by the current, she called out over the water, instructing it to follow them along the northern riverbank. A few seconds later, she sighed in relief as its horned helmet broke the surface of the water and it stomped its way onto the shore to follow them, armor glistening wetly in the late afternoon sun. Leaning back tiredly into her seat, Ludmilla placed a hand on her sore abdomen. Not far ahead, she saw the familiar sight of Corlin Village's earthen jetty. Like the one at Warden's Vale, it had been built to deflect the river current and provide a calm harbor to moor vessels in. She directed the Death Knight on the shore to run ahead to the harbor and grab a large rope to throw to its fellow on the boat when they maneuvered in closer. Between the two sturdy undead, the ship smoothly pivoted around the jetty, its momentum carrying it all the way into the calm waters of the port. As the boat lightly bumped up against the pier, she hopped off to secure it to its moorings. While she worked, a scream drew Ludmilla's attention towards the village, where a girl had appeared from a building not too far from the shore. She turned in a panic, stumbling over her feet several times as she fled. "Wait!" Ludmilla called out after her. The fleeing villager did not stop, even though Ludmilla had unconsciously projected her ability along with the word. The girl did not even slow at her voice as she scurried away down the empty village lane, shedding doubt on her confidence that she could use her abilities properly. The sight of the Death Knight stomping after the girl to make her wait, however, did not give her much time to ponder. She hurriedly recalled them before inadvertently starting some sort of mass panic in Clara's home village. The encounter had her decide against waiting on the Solita at the port, and she led her footman onto the highway to meet the wagon on the way. She spotted the Solita already galloping down the hill from the city. The roads allowed it to speed along without damaging the wagon and, within another 15 minutes, it came close to where they awaited it on the highway. After it had turned the wagon back around towards E-Rental, she hopped on and it took off back towards the city. Now that she was a passenger, the ride did not seem as smooth as it had looked when the wagon had come down the hill. As it was formerly a part of Ramposa III's domain, the highways had been paved, making them much better for carriages, carts and wagons to travel on. At the wagon's current speed, however, Ludmilla was vibrating so violently in her seat that she held worries as to whether the vehicle would shake itself apart before they returned to the city. The Solita assumed a canter after she became concerned enough to tell it to slow down and, a little over 30 minutes later, they arrived at the massive main gate of the city. The two Death Knights on either side of the entrance looked towards her briefly before returning to their watchful vigil. They did not move to impede her as she entered, and the wagon thankfully rumbled through at a much more reasonable speed than it had taken north along the highway. As they crossed into the military district that lay between the outer and second walls, it occurred to Ludmilla that she had forgotten all about her labor force. Standing up as the wagon rolled by where they were ordered to wait, she spotted them neatly arranged exactly where they should have been. She sat back down, feeling a bit guilty about neglecting them for so long, but at the same time wondering if they would wait forever if they were just left there. The wagon made its winding way through the thoroughfares of the city towards the main plaza, and Ludmilla looked up towards a familiar, barely audible chittering noise. A small black bat fluttered above them. Further above, she spotted the elder Lich, who might have been trailing her the entire time. She wondered if the imp was lurking about somewhere as well. She was about to order the Solita to stop and see if Lady Sheltia would appear when her liege suddenly alighted on the front of the wagon, the lacy frills of her gown fluttering in the wind. Without a word, she once again seated herself beside Ludmilla, as if dropping out of the sky in such a manner was perfectly normal. Ludmilla stared over at Lady Sheltia, whose crimson eyes had taken on a dim glow in the fading light. None of the undead around her reacted or even seemed to care that someone had fallen out of the sky, and Ludmilla started feeling a bit out of place being the odd one out. "My lady," Ludmilla asked, "will it become a normal thing in the city to have people landing in the street like that?" "There are many heteromorphs and demi-humans who have the ability to fly," Lady Sheltia said. "Magic users and wielders of magic items enchanted with flight spells also do so, so it should be a more common sight in the future as more peoples fall under the dominion of His Majesty." "There are no laws regulating flight in Riestais," Ludmilla said. "Perhaps you should propose a few as the Minister of Transportation to prevent incidents in the future. I cannot imagine airborne accidents ending very well for anyone involved, or the people below." "The sky is quite vast," Lady Sheltia replied, "and the chance of randomly bumping into others is much lower than walking on a street, but I suppose something should be in place to prevent potential damage to His Majesty's realm." "You have never collided with someone in flight before?" "Only when I'm aiming for them," Lady Sheltia smiled. Ludmilla shook her head, uncomprehending. Meanwhile, the Solita turned as it entered the still empty main plaza, driving the wagon towards the front of the main office of the Merchant Guild. It was a grand structure of 3 stories, occupying the entire side of the plaza where it had been constructed. Windows of clear crystal lined the second and third levels of the building, which would offer a glimpse of the archives and offices within. The main entrance had 2 pairs of glass doors at the top of the broad granite stairs leading up from street level. The imposing building stood directly across the plaza from the city's main cathedral, which had been sponsored by the theocracy at the site of the original chapel that had been built when the city was founded and Riestais was still young. The guild office was not only placed across from the cathedral, it was also built at the same height as well, if daring to challenge the might and authority of the temples. The fountain and column that they had passed between on the way to the outer reaches of the district were a reminder that this rivalry was very much real. When the main office of the Merchant Guild was constructed, it was said that the temples commissioned the beautiful fountain on their side of the plaza to remind the citizens of the life and provision that the gods provided. But then the Merchant Guild had raised the column, an elegant work of art which dominated the square. Years ago, she had overheard a conversation amongst the ladies of the nobility concerning the rivalry between the Merchant Guild and the temples. That Iranthal was a city of trade, and in the secular government of Riestais, the power of the temples was dwarfed by the influence of the guild. Because of this, the temples were said to be perpetually jealous, but could only make ineffectual motions outside of their direct spheres of authority. Worship of the 6 great gods had long since waned in the north with the rise of the faith of the 4, but the situation remained the same. Commerce was the lifeblood of the city, and the guild was its beating heart. That heart seemed still now. The gleaming head of the column caught the light of the evening sun over the rooftops, scattering its shimmering radiance in bright fragments over the plaza, but the guild office itself appeared as silent and inactive as when they had crossed the main plaza earlier that day. The windows that peeked into the archives and offices had their curtains drawn shut with no light visible behind them. There were no clients entering or leaving the building, nor anyone resting on the stairs or benches outside. As Ludmilla stepped off of the wagon and approached the main entrance, she saw that there was a single light visible from the entrance, where a balding man stood at one of the reception counters. The large door was light and soundless as she pulled it open for Lady Shortier, and the measure of their footfalls whispered on the long carpet as they approached the front desk. The old man made no move to recognize them. His head was bent over the unadorned counter as he leafed through the thick binder that lay in front of him. It was only when they had come directly in front of his stall that he raised his head. Sharp brown eyes that belied their owner's apparent age looked over to Ludmilla, then to Lady Shortier. His gaze then went down to their hands before finally settling on the blue folder in Ludmilla's possession. The old man looked Ludmilla in the eye and spoke in a clipped, yet decisive tone. "What business do you have with the guild?" Unsure on how to respond, Ludmilla opened her folder, retrieved the 2 invoices within and placed them on the counter. The man immediately took the sheets of paper, holding them up in his lean hands towards the light. It took him a minute to scan over the first invoice, after which he switched to the other. He then walked over to a long table behind the counter, flipping through another binder which lay there. After a few more minutes, the man returned to the reception counter. He rolled a large stamp over an ink pad, and pressed it onto both of the invoices. Ludmilla thought she saw the ink glow briefly before he placed his palm over the invoices and spoke. "Do you have an account with the guild, Baroness Zaradnik?" he asked. "I am not a merchant," she replied. "You don't have to be," he patted the invoices. "Anyone that does business like this should register with the guild." "Why is that?" Ludmilla asked. "Have you ever seen someone pull 100 platinum coins out of their pocket?" He tapped his finger on the perfumer's invoice. "Well, no," she admitted. "Me neither," he said. "That's what the guild does. You don't carry coin around doing business like this, you just use invoices like the ones on the counter here. The guild ensures that each transaction is authentic and then the money is transferred between accounts. The only time people move real coin around is with an armed escort to places where there's a need for it." "What about all of the people in the city that trade in coin?" "We usually don't deal with them," he said, "but we do deal with the merchants that take their coin and deposit it here. The guild mostly deals with real money, sums of platinum like these invoices or even greater." "It goes higher than platinum?" "Sure does. Mithril and adamantite coins. Gem coins and official plaques of credit. You don't see that around here though. Too poor." Just this morning, Ludmilla was agonizing over how to budget out a few hundred gold coins to supply her domain. Now, after she had come into wealth she had never seen before, much less expected to possess so soon, this man was telling her that platinum was the smallest denomination of currency that they normally dealt with, and that the largest trade hub in the nearby region was considered too poor to deal in anything greater. "All right then," she said, "how do I register an account?" "You'll need to provide proof of your identity and a seal so we can add it to our archives for authentication purposes," he replied. "But you just addressed me as Baroness Zaradnik." "A courtesy." "Then what do you deem suitable as proof of identity?" Ludmilla asked. "Official documents from the administrative office that you report to," he said. "Or you can have an official vouch for your identity." "Oh, I can do that," Lady Shiltier said from beside her. The old clerk turned his attention to Lady Shiltier, whose shoulders barely appeared above the counter. "And you are?" "This is Lady Shiltier Bloodfallen." "Never heard of her." "Lady Shiltier is the Minister of Transportation." "Lady Shiltier will need to provide proof of her identity and provide a seal so we can add it to our archives for authentication." Lady Shiltier is about to turn this entire building into a heap of cinders with a firestorm spell. Seeing her liege's mood take a turn for the worse, Ludmilla hurriedly attempted to de-escalate the situation. "A moment please, my lady," she implored Lady Shiltier in placating tones. She turned towards the entrance and paced hurriedly towards the door. When she stood at the top of the stairs outside, she looked around for the Elder Lich. Spotting it floating above the plaza, she waved for it to come down. "Do you have proof of identification and a seal of office as a member of the administration?" she asked. "Yes," it said. "I require your assistance, then. Come with me." Ludmilla turned back to enter the office, hoping that she was fast enough to prevent whatever a firestorm spell was from befalling the building. Fortunately, Lady Shiltier did not appear to be casting anything when she returned to the counter, but, upon seeing the Elder Lich with what was needed in hand, her expression darkened even further. "The official here can vouch for our identity," she motioned for the Elder Lich to come forward. "Are these credentials acceptable?" The attaché placed what appeared to be a small plaque and an ebony seal on the counter. The old man raised the items to the light no differently than he had the invoices, and there was no sign he even cared that an Elder Lich had walked up to him. Shortly after, he placed them back on the counter and produced two identical forms from somewhere out of sight below the desk. Ludmilla filled her form and stamped it with the seal that she had brought with her from Warden's Vale. The seals of the Merchant Guild and the Civil Office of the Sorceress Kingdom followed soon after. They moved to work on Lady Shiltier's documentation, but when the Elder Lich raised its hand to stamp the form, the vampire shouted, "Wait!" Three heads turned to Lady Shiltier at the interruption. "Not you," she said to the Elder Lich, "you." Ludmilla found Lady Shiltier's finger pointed towards her. "My lady. You can vouch for me and use your seal on the form," Lady Shiltier said. "You had your identity verified by this attaché, yes?" It seemed needlessly convoluted, but Ludmilla acquiesced. The guild clerk disappeared into the office, shaking his head, after which Lady Shiltier spoke. "That gorilla did it on purpose," she said testily. "What is a gorilla, my lady?" Ludmilla asked. Never mind. The Guardian Overseer is making things hard for me on purpose. There's no way she didn't know that I would need these things eventually, and then she sent this Elder Lich with everything that you need as your attaché to serve as a constant reminder of her influence even as you are subordinate to me." Lady Shiltier, Ludmilla licked her lips as she tried phrasing her question tactfully. "Are there issues in the royal court?" "Issues? You seem to have a rather disagreeable relationship with the Guardian Overseer." "Ah, that's what you mean," Lady Shiltier said. "We are rivals, not enemies. There is solidarity when it comes to the will of His Majesty and the defense of his realm." "Then, if I may ask, my lady," Ludmilla was still unsure if it was a delicate subject or not, "what is the nature of this rivalry?" "The only thing that matters, of course," Lady Shiltier said matter-of-factly, "to earn our place at the side of His Majesty, in all things. Do ambitious human nobles not seek great achievements within their courts? To win the appreciation and trust of their liege?" "In many things, yes, that is the case, my lady," Ludmilla replied. This rivalry can become a bit intense sometimes, Lady Shiltia said, but it has never grown to the point where His Majesty's realm has suffered for it. Thank you for the explanation, my lady. I will keep this in mind. As they waited in silence, Ludmilla looked at the elder lich that had stood on the other side of her for the entire conversation. It displayed no reaction to the accusation that it had been dispatched as a form of harassment. She heard shuffling steps as the old man reappeared. Ludmilla turned to face him as he placed several documents between on the polished counter, pushing them forward. These are the relevant templates that you should use when drawing up bills and invoices related to guild business. Make sure that the staff that you assign to work with us are familiar with the format. He straightened after his explanation. Your registrations with the guild are now complete and your account balances have been updated. These are your balance books. Is there anything else you need, Minister Bloodfallen? Baroness Zaradnik? Ludmilla reached out to take the small booklet bound in black vellum. She opened the unmarked cover. The front page was similarly blank, but the next page had rows and columns lined upon it. Written on the first row was the balance of her account with the Merchant Guild. Between the invoices from Gareth Boyce's lumberyard and the Linnes workshop, House Zaradnik had received 108 platinum coins. It was an amount she had never thought she would ever have available to use at once. The digits were written in simple cursive, but they represented a responsibility that she would now need to wield for the prosperity of her domain. I need to purchase tools for farming and forestry, Ludmilla asked the clerk waiting patiently across the counter. Is there an open business where I can find those? Just head to where all the forges are, he told her. If there are any working, you'll definitely notice. The answer seemed obvious, after the fact. When is it appropriate to deposit and withdraw at the guild? There are no set rules on that, he replied, but as a general guideline, any amount that you feel unsafe carrying around. Can the guild be used to hold coin for anything? Ludmilla asked. Yes, the clerk nodded. We prefer it that way, in fact. It's easier to deal on paper, but a lot of people can't trust that. Unless you're a high noble, you probably can't afford the type of security that the guild has. The new king has also contributed some of his soldiers to ensure that the wealth of the city remains secure. Then you don't mind if wages and such are withdrawn by my staff? MMH, the clerk grunted. Petty amounts should be withdrawn as part of a lump sum. We've a few members that send escorts with their agents to collect wages for the whole of their staff to be distributed at their business or homes. You should do the same. Is there anything I should avoid doing? Nothing illegal. You'll be reported to the relevant authorities if you do, the clerk said. If there are any other transactions that run afoul of guild regulations or seem suspicious, you'll be informed as well. It nearly felt to her a barb, though the man probably did not know. If House Zaradnik had used the services of the guild instead of relying on themselves, generations of financial hardship might have been circumvented altogether. It brought to mind something that she had thought about shortly after learning the depressing reality. Does the guild recommend merchants? She asked. I would like to hire staff that can manage the commercial transactions for my domain. We set up apprentices with masters, but it's rare that a noble comes looking. They usually employ the ones from their own fiefs. The man scratched his chin as he thought. The city's had a pretty good shake-up, so there might be some loose ones available. He fished up a blank sheet of paper, placing it on the counter between them. Put down what you're looking for here. The types of goods and services you'll be dealing in, compensation, licenses you're offering, security arrangements and such. Ludmilla's borrowed pen scratched over the paper for several minutes as she tried to think of everything she might need. When the old man read over her requirements, his eyebrows rose. I've never seen a request like this before, he told her. Nobles usually hire their own merchants to assist with managing things, but you're looking to put one on retainer to help handle the business of your fief. Most nobles are passable at dealing with their own territories, so they tend to have a hand directing their own production and trade. If it comes down to it, they'll have one of their children trained as a professional merchant to run the family business. House Zaradnik has never been known for being merchants. Despite herself, Ludmilla still nursed some of the bitterness from the afternoon in her heart. I will have my hands full directing the development of my fief, so I would feel much more comfortable if there was someone to take care of this end of things, several such retainers, if necessary. Well, any merchant will hire apprentices and assistants when business is good, so it should be the same for whoever you take in, except that apprentice will become a member of your retinue as well. Most merchants can't do better than what a noble's retainer gains through their service, but the sudden exposure to authority and wealth is sure to get into most people's heads. I'll see what I can do, but I wouldn't hope for anything spectacular, especially with things as they are right now. Ludmilla nodded at the response. The old clerk's reply brought her to her last question. I understand, she said. Send word to my residents in the Central District if you find anyone appropriate. There is just one last thing both the minister and I would like to know. And what is that? The city has become paralyzed after the duchy changed hands, Ludmilla said. The markets and shops are closed and, barring the few places I've found, the various industries have become silent as well. How is it that the Merchant Guild remains open? Or more to the point, how can you still stand and serve clients here, when nearly all of your associates still hide in their homes? That's simple, the clerk didn't even bother to stop and think before answering. The city is open, so the guild is open. In our line of work, we deal with the fear that comes with opportunity and risk every single day. Those that lose themselves to their fear have no right being here,